Creativity and community are absolutely vital in challenging times. Creativity is also consistently named as one of the top skills of the 21st century, particularly in the age of AI. Welcome to Syncreate, a show where we explore the intersections between creativity, psychology, and spirituality. We believe everyone has the capacity to create. Our goal is to demystify the process and expand the boundaries of what it means to be creative. We talk with visionaries and change makers and everyday creatives working in a wide range of fields and media, from the arts to science, technology, and business. We aim to illuminate the creative process, from imagination to innovation and everything in between. I'm Melinda Rothouse, and I help individuals and organizations bring their dreams and visions to life. At Syncreate, we're here to support your creative endeavors. If you have an idea for a project or new venture, but you're not quite sure how to get it off the ground, please reach out to us at syncreate.org. Our book, also called Syncreate, walks you through the stages of the creative process so you can take action on your goals. We also offer resources, creative process tools, and coaching to help you bring your work to the world, including a monthly coaching group. So check out the website for more details. My guest today is Tracy Sisk. She's a licensed mental health counselor and PhD candidate at Saybrook University, where I also did my PhD. She's based in Clearwater, Florida, and she practices under the name of Honor Your Way Therapy. She's also the founder of The Practitioner's Place, a space for emerging therapists and psychologists to connect, support each other, and navigating their professional identities. So welcome, Tracy. It's so wonderful to have you on the show today.
Oh, thank you so much, Melinda. I really appreciate you inviting me, and I'm excited because this is my first podcast
All
guest
right.
appearance.
Woohoo.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Of course, it's my pleasure. And, we've known each other for a number of years now. We met at Saybrook University, and you're completing your PhD there, which is so exciting. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that. But you're a licensed mental health counselor. And I know as a therapist, you work with a lot of people with trauma. And also we've talked so much about creativity. Creativity is such a big part of the Saybrook experience. And I think for a lot of people, with trauma, which we all have some kind of trauma, some of them are more extreme, but each is unique to each of us and our experience. And that trauma can become a barrier to full creative expression, right? And full just kind of, human flourishing. And so I wanted to kind of dive in there and see kind of your thoughts on the relationship between trauma and creativity, because we also know that creativity can be a very potent way of working with and working through trauma, right? We have the fields of art therapy, expressive arts, and things like this. And so I just wanted to kind of hear your perspective on that relationship.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's a really important part of our mental health work. And dare I go so quickly into it, also with what's happening in the world right now. We're all kind of in a trauma response on the spectrum of what that means to us and how things are impacting us. So it's really important for us to talk about that. And as a mental health practitioner, when I think about trauma, what I recognize is that it really has an impact on our brain and the abilities that it has to be able to process information, to process memories, to integrate information across the right and the left side of our brain. And as we know with creativity, that really needs that crossing, the integration between the two hemispheres. And so when we have traumatic experiences, when that process gets disrupted, then it can be really difficult for us to move out of the consciousness or the even the lived felt experience of the trauma that we have experienced. So, as a licensed health practitioner, knowing that and keeping that in mind with clients who I'm helping to work through and to process and to integrate and move forward from these experiences, the creativity comes in helping them to move beyond the rigid thinking or the blocked thinking. We can even think of it that way, and into some creative or different ways of looking at different ways of experiencing the memories and the affects of the trauma experiences.
Yeah, yeah. So what really strikes me about that is that trauma, like, it literally affects our brain and our abilities to think and process. And, so much wonderful work has been done looking at, how creativity can facilitate healing. Our beloved former professor at Saybrook's, Dr. Stanley Krippner, has done a lot of work on kind of PTSD and, in which certain traumatic memories get sort of like frozen in our brain, and how creativity and expressive writing and things like that can help us move through those kind of frozen states.
Mhm, mhm. Definitely, and yes, the writing and the poetry and the music and the dance, all of that kind of those fine arts types of creative pathways are helpful, and in my practice, I have really come to use somatic therapy and
Yes.
somatic embodiment work as a creative process in healing our trauma. So even if someone isn't into writing poems or even writing journals, which a lot of people don't even like to do that, then simply being creative and getting into our body and again out of our head, right, where we're kind of spinning in the memories and having that block and really moving, nudging beyond that. The somatic work gets us out of that process and into our body, feeling our body, remembering we have a body,
Yes.
reattaching to our body, and beginning to feel our own presence in the world again as a creative process then starts that neuroplasticity process of rewiring and desensitizing
Yeah.
those really sensitive, tender areas.
Yeah, beautiful. So for those who may not be as familiar with kind of somatic based therapy, what does that look like? How do you work with that in your client sessions?
Yeah, yeah. So, really, as long as my clients give consent and they're okay with it, I start with breath work.
Mhm.
Every one of my sessions, again, with consent and the clients who are good with it, we start with some meditative breath work to ground and to
Mhm.
center and to bring us out of that headspace where we get so stuck at the very beginning, and also as a model for clients moving forward that regulates our central nervous system and we begin to feel present in our life again. And then as we move forward with the work, of course, depending on, why they're seeing me and what they've experienced, then I add in the somatic work, which to me in my practice is really matching breath to movement
Mhm.
to create space where we're feeling that tension and that energy as we're talking about or, ruminating on the traumatic experiences that we've had. So that relieves the tension and helps to create a creative process to move beyond getting stuck either in the thoughts or to help move past that barrier to really being more alive and more present in more of our life.
Yes. Yes, it's amazing, how even just a little bit of movement can open up so many things in the body, and of course, again, in terms of trauma, we hold a lot of that trauma in our bodies, in patterns of holding tension in certain areas or things like that. So just, you know, getting into a bit of movement can really open things up in a beautiful way.
Yeah, one thing that I do too, just to add before we move on, is
Sure.
I help my clients to kind of disguise that in some ways if they're even in a public space or in a meeting at work or, having a debate with someone. I kind of help them. Well, you can even just make it look like a yawn and a stretch, or, so you're kind of disguising our process of regulating our emotions in the moment when we need it. And they really appreciate those little tips that I can give them because it really makes the work uh, really transferable into any environment that we find ourselves.
Sure, that makes perfect sense. It's not just in the therapy office, but as we go about our daily lives that we need these, just little moments, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. So, another thing that came up in our kind of, initial conversations around doing this podcast episode is, you shared with me that you had seen an article, by a woman who was a client of therapy, kind of frustrated with the therapeutic process, having seen a number of different therapists and feeling like she didn't get the sort of immediate answers that she was looking for. And I thought you had a really interesting kind of perspective on that. So would you be willing to share more kind of that article and what it said and kind of how you're thinking about a response to that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, it was a post on LinkedIn and it really hit my heart
Yeah.
because as mental health practitioners, all of us, whatever our role might be, our intention and our ethics and the compact we have with ourselves is to do no harm.
Yes.
And yet, because we are human, and as our clients who are coming in with so many things that are hard to live with, hard to see and to accept, and to really recognize that we're struggling in some ways, right? And this young woman posted this that she had seen several practitioners and had been diagnosed with a few different things along the way. And then she was basically saying that the mental health system had failed her because of her journey in the mental health system, and she had finally made it to some ways of showing up to where she's feeling better and she's healing and doing better in her life. And I thought, oh, that's great. I'm so glad that she shared that with us too, right? That
For
she's
sure.
doing good. And then when I was thinking about the negative association that she shared with her journey in the mental health process, um, I started um, wondering how a creative process might help her to kind of shift that to a positive, more abundant perspective of her journey, in that yes, perhaps there were different diagnoses with different practitioners she got along the way, and yet each time that she was working with someone and hearing the messages and getting reflections and moving through some treatment protocols, that she was healing and growing and transforming in the process. And when we can really hold that creative lens, right, going from like the heart filled kind of immediate, oh my gosh, that was such a terrible experience, to, well, thinking back and thinking creatively, I really did grow and change, and my life has shifted because of that time that I had in the mental health therapy process. And then that helps us to release some of those tethers of pulling to the negative and pulling to, even if it was even a traumatic level type of experience, it helps us to stay present in the healing process where we are right now, and the goodness that we have right now in the moment.
Yeah, I think that's so important because it's not necessarily a one and done thing.
Right.
Especially if we have experienced some kind of trauma or we have a particular diagnosis, it can take time, maybe many years, to sort of unravel that. And it's a process that, on some level, as long as we're alive, we're continuing to develop and grow. And so we might see one practitioner and they help us with one kind of aspect or facet. And I know in my own experience, I've seen many different practitioners over the years, both therapists and other types of healers. And, each one has a sort of unique focus and a unique gift. And, they're all kind of pieces in the larger puzzle. And maybe we need different things at different times, or this approach is working well now, and this approach is working well at another time. And, so I see it as almost like, like the analogy of the puzzle or a tapestry, right?
Mm.
And I know that can be frustrating for people because, unless their insurance is covering it, they may be paying out of pocket and they want something that's just going to fix them right then and there. But
Yeah.
that's not quite how it works, right?
Right. I tell my clients all the time, I wish I had a magic wand because every one of you would get the pixie dust the first time you walk in my office.
Right, right.
It's just not the way that it works.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think also in my experience, coaching and working with clients, it's those people that are the most open to the process, the most curious, the most willing to, reflect on their inner experience and who really want to grow. Um that that tend to have the best outcomes. And of course, some people, because of trauma, that's not possible, right? And so it's this unwinding and kind of like really looking into what happened, how it's affecting us, how do we want to move forward, can take time.
It can. And, to go back just a little bit on what you said as far as like, the willingness or the openness to do the work. I mean, even if someone comes in and they're unable to like move into a space that we might hope that they could go, right? I have come to really understand and to value and to know that when they're coming to therapy, they're wanting something. There is a motivation there, right? And to really value that as far as they're able to go with the time that they're with me, that's beautiful. And let's celebrate that and send them off maybe to another practitioner to come at a different perspective, like you had mentioned, or maybe that is to just go back into their lives right now and be better right here, right now. And then that, starts to impact the trajectory of their lives moving forward, perhaps with some additional therapy or, just kind of in a coasting state if that's what they need in their lives at the time.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, I mean, even just coming to therapy in the first place is a huge step, right?
It
Just
is,
walking in
yeah.
the door, for so many
Yeah.
people. And it's also a question of timing. Like, is it the right time, the right moment? Do people feel safe kind of opening up in that way and so forth? Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. So I know that you also recently started an organization called the Practitioner's Place to help support other mental health practitioners, therapists, emerging psychologists, so that as peers, people have space to connect with other practitioners and explore and share resources and navigate their professional journeys. So, love to hear a little bit more about that work that you're doing and kind of what inspired that for you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So the inspiration for the practitioner's place is embedded in my PhD research in my dissertation. And in that, I am interviewing early career psychologists and talking to them about this intersection between their journey of professional identity development and their personal life,
Mhm.
and specifically into their intimate relationship in this study here. So what I'm learning in that, which I kind of do myself because I'm on the same journey, right?
Of
I'm in the
course.
process of becoming a psychologist.
Right.
And the literature out there, tells us that there is definitely this interaction, this dynamic, because we are simply people in different roles in our life, thinking of it from that perspective. And what I'm hearing from my interviewees in my research is that yes, we can't be divided, right? We are all one person. And so there is always this dynamic between what I'm learning, how I'm transforming because of that, and then how do I be that new person transforming, learning more about that in my home and in my intimate relationship. So the practitioner's place is this space to catch us in that intersection, to honor and to nurture both our professional development side of us and are the person side of who we are, and still showing up in our lives, still having to run kiddos to soccer, still having to do all the things, right? And maintain a relationship if we're in one. And then also becoming a psychologist. Yeah.
Yeah. So, of course, mental health practitioners need support and community just like everybody else, right? And it's so helpful to have a community of peers that you can kind of share ideas and stories with and just feel that you're not alone, right? Just to have a sense of community.
Yeah. And another need that the practitioner's place fills, which I felt myself and I've had peers talk, through the years and training, is that, the university faculty and our advisors and everyone in that system and our supervisors and everyone else in the training process, they can only hold so much, right? They all have their own purposes and own lenses through which they support us. And so it is kind of in this personhood space that there is a gap
Hmm.
in the process just naturally. And so the practitioner's place is here to be a steady space where we can be nurtured in all of those in betweens. We're in consistent transition. We go to class, it ends, we go to another class, the next semester comes, the next supervising advisor comes, and the next internship or practicum. And so the practitioner's place is here to be a steady spot all the way through that process. And even in to licensure, there's great networking opportunities, and the cross pollination of practitioners who are merging and licensed practitioners is really valuable too, because so much of being a mental health practitioner is learning how to be who we are and in all of our humanity in the room too, and hearing that and experiencing that from our colleagues who are farther along on the journey can be really helpful too.
Yes, absolutely. And so I know you're based in Clearwater, Florida. So is the practitioner's place more focused on the local community or is it open to anyone?
Yeah, thank you. Good question. Right now, it's actually all online.
Okay.
So it is open to people across the country who are in graduate school, who are postdoc in internship, licensed mental health counselors, social workers, MFTs, and then of course the spectrum of people who are on the psychology journey also. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Good to know. I might mention it to some of my current students. I think they would love that. Yeah, yeah, great. So, um, I've had several different mental health practitioners on the show already, one of whom is our dear colleague from Sabrick, Dr. Diana Rivera. And I spoke with her in an early episode of the show on the kind of topic of creativity and imagination, which was kind of the focus of her dissertation research. And when we were chatting last night, you were kind of mentioning, sort of how you were intrigued by that idea of imagination and how that figures into kind of therapeutic practice and creativity. So, love to hear more about that.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I listened to that, and that really sparked my creativity and thinking the way I see my clients and try to make some sense to offer ways for them to maybe see themselves in a creative, different way too. And one of the places that the imagination really stuck with me is like when we get these old records that just keep spinning in our mind, right? These thoughts that just keep ruminating and going, and we can't get out of it. And it kind of keeps us stuck.
Yeah.
And so, what I started thinking is like, wow, that seems like that is like our imagination kind of running amok, right? Running on
Mm-hmm.
its own. And we kind of get stuck in that because typically those ruminating thoughts, or maybe not typically, but a lot of the time, those thoughts are things that we're imagining might happen in the future. Or, like, if someone is going through a divorce and having a hard time adjusting to that, and they're kind of finding their imagination pulling them back into that relationship and all the hopes and the dreams and wishing things were different, and kind of making assumptions to make sense out of what their partner is doing now in their lives, right? Kind of that imagination running wild. And what that does is that keeps us kind of in that grief and maybe trauma, depending on the quality of the relationship that we were in. And so kind of melding that with the creativity, I may talk with someone and really ask them, well, what's in that kind of imagination running, and where are the assumptions that you're
Mhm.
making in that, right? What evidence can you find, or have you already seen that can really help you understand whether that really is something that's happening, or if it is just the imagination kind of spiraling based on our pain or whatever our experience was in that breakup.
Yeah, sure. And, it makes me think I just mentioned to you, I led a retreat this past weekend over the equinox in Northern California with my friend and colleague, Jenny Fairbank. And, we were
Mm,
just in that retreat talking more about kind of the season transitioning to autumn, and then this idea of balance during the equinox and working with
mhm.
energies. But one of the things that came up a lot in the retreat, and Charlotte and I also talk a lot about it in our book and some of our other podcast episodes, is the what if
Mm,
question. So sometimes we get so focused on what's right in front of us that we sort of forget about the wider possibilities. And I think that also connects with what you're talking about. If we get sort of in these thought loops, maybe we forget there's a whole broad palette of possibilities and experiences. And so if we can kind of recognize that and start to maybe even allow ourselves to dream, not just, what if on the negative side, right? Like all the negative possibilities that could happen, but on the positive side too.
Mhm. Definitely, and for me, in the present side, right,
Yes,
is
yes.
really where I try to move
Important.
clients to. Yeah, because we can also our imagination can kinda run a little too far ahead also, right? And then that keeps us from being present
Mhm.
in the moment. So it's all part of it, like, to have this lovely vision and yet to be present right here as much as we can right now to take the steps to get there.
That was a huge discovery for me at one point in my life when I went through a very difficult breakup and it felt like I also had moved from New Orleans to Austin after Hurricane Katrina, and I was starting my life from scratch, and I was having, like, panic attacks, and that's when I really started meditating, just that practice of being fully present with whatever's happening, even if it's anxiety. It in the moment, it just opens up a lot of space because tend to just keep our minds and ourselves in this perpetual motion, right? And so slowing down and just being fully present, whatever's happening, it can open up a lot of space.
Yes, definitely. And if we think about the biological process of anxiety, that's our central nervous system dumping in those stress hormones into our brain. And we get flooded and we get brain fog and we can't think. So it's like we kind of run up against a wall. So if we continue to kind of push and spin in the moment, then that keeps those stress hormones pumping in. But if we can take those breaths, and come back into our body and distract from the panic or whatever it is driving our anxiety, then that also slows that whole biological process down. Then our brain functions can come back as the hormones are secreted and metabolized out of our body. And then we can begin the detox process of having all that pumped in. Right,
Yeah.
and then we can regulate, then we can really feel present, we can come back into our body
Yeah.
to be right here, right now.
Beautiful. Yeah, it's one of those things like we sort of talk about it over and over and over again. It seems so simple, and yet it's quite profound.
It's a very complicated system, right? Just like
Yeah.
all I mean, humans are a miracle walking.
So
How we
true.
all work and, even show up and breathe every day. It's a miracle, so,
Yes,
yeah.
yes, absolutely. Yeah. So awesome. So much good stuff here. Can't wait for this episode to come out. And I usually like to conclude with what I call a creativity pro tip, something that people can try out and practice on their own. So we've covered a lot of, I think, amazing topics today around therapy and creativity, trauma, self-regulation, all these kind of things. So, if there was sort of like one tip you would suggest for people to try out, particularly if they are struggling with, anxiety and maybe they're not currently working with a therapist, like what's one of your sort of go-to strategies?
Yeah, and there's a few. That first step of breath work, I think, is the most powerful
Yeah.
because we have our breath with us always, 24/7. We don't need to get it out of the drawer. We don't need to, you know, pull it out of our pocket. We can simply get into the process of reminding ourselves to take a breath when we start to feel overwhelmed. And that's applicable no matter where we are in whatever situation. Like in the grocery store, if your little one is crying and screaming for whatever the reason, and you just want to get through that line and get home and get dinner and all the things, right in that moment, you can take a breath
Yes.
and reset and come back out of your head that's like, "Oh my gosh, why are you screaming?" or whatever. Or the person in front is taking more time than you think you have. So yeah, the breath work really is the first line of our power to re-regulate. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. It's funny, this reminds me of a personal anecdote that happened the other day where I was, on my way back from this retreat, and I had a very short layover in Phoenix, and I was running to catch my next plane, which I just barely got
Mhm.
on the plane. And then it's kind of one of those, like, scenarios like, "Uh-oh." So I walk up to my row, and I'm sitting in the window, and there's a couple with an infant child sitting right next to me, and the mom's holding the daughter in the middle seat, so right next to me, and I just think, "Uh-oh." Right? But, I sat down and I started kinda chit-chatting with them and interacting with the baby, and she kinda, like, held my finger, and the mom was like, "I apologize in advance, she's exhausted, and, let's see how this goes." But for me, I had to do a bit of self-regulation because of the negative anticipation of like, "Oh, this kid's gonna be screaming the whole time," But I was like, "Well, maybe if I regulate my nervous system, that'll
Mhm.
have a positive effect," And there were a couple times when she started to get a little fussy, but then once we took off, she just went right to sleep. It was
Oh,
amazing because, we've all had those experiences, and I'm sure as parents, you think about how anxiety provoking that is as a parent to bring your kid on the
yeah.
plane and, like,
Mhm.
right? So, for me, that was, like, a good lesson.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you for your empathy and understanding being a parent with little ones on the plane. I've been there.
Yes, yes, I know, like, so
Oh,
many have
yeah.
been on one side or the other of that, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
One thing too, just kind of bringing that to my own experience as a
Yeah.
therapist in the room with clients. We as mental health practitioners, our schedules are full and we have a lot going on. And so oftentimes, if I'm feeling like the weight of my day or some emotional weight from a client before the next client comes in, I actually do that breath work that I was saying
Mhm.
earlier, right with my clients.
Yeah.
I center myself and really ground and come into the space and into my own body right there with my clients. And then even after holding them through a journey of processing some trauma and really creating the space for their emotions to come into the room, right? For myself, when I move them through that somatic process to regulate and to come back into their body, I also do that with them sometimes if I'm really kind of needing that myself to regulate and to continue to hold them in the way that they are
Yeah.
here to be held.
That's
Yeah.
so important because, we do help co-regulate each other, right?
Mhm.
Whether in a therapeutic relationship or with our partners or friends, even colleagues, right? And so we can have a positive effect and even a ripple effect by working with our own breath and our own nervous system regulation and then, kind of doing that in partnership with others.
Yes, and that's one of the soft skills that the practitioner place is here to help develop in our practitioners because that is like a muscle and that has to be worked and experienced and learned from to be able to get into that space of regulating ourselves as well as co-regulating that energy field that we have together with our clients.
Yes,
Yeah.
beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Tracy. It's been such a pleasure to chat with you for your first podcast experience. So I'm so excited.
Yay.
And, speaking of the practitioner's place and your own therapeutic practice, Honor Your Way therapy, what's the best way for people to find you?
Yeah, so I do have websites for both. If you're looking for therapy for anxiety, depression, trauma recovery, or couples therapy, also, you can check out the website at honoryourway.com. And for the practitioner's place, if you want to come and really feel nurtured and in a community of mental health practitioners, that website is thepractitionersplace.com. And there's contact pages and everything on both of the websites there.
Okay, perfect. Well, wonderful. Thank you again so much for being with us today.
No, thank you, Melinda. You made this very comfortable, and thank you. I appreciate a great conversation, and as always, it's always good to spend time with you.
Likewise. Find and connect with us on YouTube and social media under Syncreate. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'd also love to hear from you what you love about the show, what you'd like to see more of, and potential guests. So please reach out to us at info@syncreate.org. We're recording today at Record ATX Studios in Austin, Texas, with Tracy joining us from Clearwater, Florida. The podcast is produced in collaboration with Mike Osborne at 14th Street Studios. Thanks so much for being with us, and see you next time.